She heads India's largest bank, a bank that has become a whole lot larger in the recent past. Arundhati Bhattacharya joins us now to talk a little bit about the future of the State Bank of India, about how the bank continues to contribute in so many fields to the day-to-day life of millions of Indians. Thank you, ma'am, very much for speaking to us. One of the biggest challenges for all banks, certainly the State Bank of India, have been non-performing assets. Bad loans worth 9.64 trillion rupees are choking the system. And public sector banks have bad loans to the tune of 6 lakh crore rupees. That's one of your biggest challenges. The government has now been proactive. They are trying to they are getting an ordinance through on non-performing assets. Do you believe that it's the biggest defaulters who need to be targeted first?
See, it's like this. First and foremost, public sector comprises 70% of the Indian banking system. Therefore, obviously, if there are non-performing assets in the system, public sector will have a majority share there as well. It's nothing to do with being public sector. It's a fact that the public sector is still the biggest entity in commercial banking. Secondly, public sector has also been in the forefront of infrastructure building, and that is all correct, because if you look at India today, if you land in any of India's airports today, you'll feel very proud at the state of the airports. The reason is that, well, money has been spent from the public sector side as well in order to build that infrastructure.
Yes.
It is the same case with power, it is the same case with roads, it's the same case with ports. Having said that, why did we get this non-performing assets? One, of course, is the fact that there was a time when there was explosive growth. As a result of that explosive growth, there was a lot of pushback, because there was a feeling that resources were being allocated without transparency. Okay? And as a pushback to that, a lot of things came to a standstill. A lot of resources that were allocated got cancelled. So, you know, all of the assumptions that were made while lending, they went haywire.
Right.
That is what has resulted in this entire systemic issue coming to the fore.
But
So,
ma'am, there are defaulters and then there are willful defaulters as well.
but you know, willful defaulters are only a small percentage of
But thousands of crores across
No,
public
it
sector
isn't
banks.
thousands of crores across. You know, actually speaking, if you go down to the willful defaulters, it'll all come down to 4, 5, 6, 10 accounts. But the majority of what has happened is not willful default. It is default on account of the fact that, as I said, you know, the land acquisition didn't come through on time, licenses given were cancelled, mines that were given were taken back. You know, there were various such other policy issues because of which the whole thing got stopped. Not only that, India was growing at 8.5. The assumption was that we would go to double-digit GDP growths, and accordingly capacity was put in. However, instead of going to 10.5, we came down to 4.5. And then you are still expecting that the kind of cash generation that was anticipated if the GDP had gone to 10.5 would happen at 4.5. Didn't happen. That in turn made these borrowers, made it difficult on their part to be able to service the bank loans that they had taken in order to add capacity. Now, having said that, you know, even today many of these accounts that have been classified are still operating. So they have units that are still working, that are still producing cash. However, the amount that they are producing may not be sufficient to cover the interest that they are accruing.
Yes.
So we need to do a reworking. We need to do a reworking in the sense we need to write down equity, we need to write down debt, bring it to a level where the unit will be able to sustain it, so that, you know, they can get proper support for
So
their
you will have to
working
accept
capital.
losses.
Everybody will have to do it. The promoters will have to do it. Some of the banks will have to do it. The losses could be temporary in nature, in the sense that as these units begin to pick up in a proper manner, today if they are classified, the banking system is not able to support them with working capital. If they become sustainable, the banking system would be able to support it again. Not only that, if you look at all the macro parameters in India, we are on the verge of another growth cycle. So as that kicks in and the capacity utilization of the existing resources go up, you will find that their ability to give more and more back will get enhanced. So whatever write-downs we take currently may not be permanent write-downs, may be something that which we may be able to claw back to some
So a
extent.
settlement scheme of sorts.
It has to be. It has to be.
So in terms of getting non-performing assets to perform again, settlement schemes you believe is one option. What about loans being transferred to asset reconstruction companies? There has been some problems with this because, you know, there are legal issues as well.
See, what we really need to do is to get the NCLTs, which will actually implement the bankruptcy law, working in a proper manner as quickly as possible. Today, the issue is that while the NCLTs have been set up, the infrastructure around the NCLTs is yet to come up. You need, for instance, something called an information utility that will be able to advise the NCLT what is the outstanding loan of a borrower, what are the covenants that the borrower has accepted, what is the state of the security that is there behind these loans, immediately as soon as NCLT asks for it. Because if that cannot happen, then the period that has been given for resolution of the asset, which is a maximum of 270 days, that period cannot be adhered to.
Okay.
So I would say going forward, the way out for India is to ensure that these NCLTs become efficient dispensers of resolution processes, and this is something that we need to get done as quickly as possible.
The finance minister just a few days back said he was focusing on just 40 to 50 big corporate borrowers would solve the crisis quickly, whereas earlier you seemed to indicate that you know, there are larger conditions, there are larger reasons why people have not performed in terms of returning what was due to them. Do you believe in SBI that you need to go after 40 to 50 big corporate borrowers?
Actually, you know, it's not a question of going after anybody. It's a question of resolving the big ones, okay? And as I said, the big ones also, it is not a question that they have all willfully defaulted. Very unfortunately in India, NPAs are immediately associated with criminality. That's not the case. There have been NPAs world over and resolution processes world over. If you look at the US, if you look at China, if you look at the UK, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, I can name a host of other countries which have had these kind of cycles. And these cycles are normally, you know, it's a boom and a bust cycle that always happens. And therefore, you know, it is something that has affected many, many countries across the globe. Now, when it happens in a systemic manner, the way it has happened in India, you have to have a systemic solution. You cannot have individual solutions only. And again, it is very difficult to give a structure and say fit everything within that. RBI has given certain structures. We have not been able to fit these into the structures given because maybe the solution for each of them will be slightly different from that of the other. But we do have to have certain systemic ways of resolving these. When the finance minister talked about the 40, 50 large ones, if you look at a bank like us, 50% or rather 47% of our NPAs pertain to the 50 top accounts. So obviously if we are able to resolve these 50 accounts, half of our NPA issue goes away.
Right.
So therefore it does make sense to concentrate on the top ones, to get a solution there, and then try to see how we resolve the ones
But
down
again, the
below.
top ones you're talking about are not necessarily all willful defaulters.
No, not at all, not at all. There would be only 10% of those who are willful. The rest are all caught in situations because of which it has become like this.
But as far as the willful defaulters are concerned, and I ask you this because there is an element of overwhelming criminality in so many of these cases, how aggressively will the State Bank of India, using the new ordinance, be able to go after willful defaulters?
No, I don't really know what will be the nature of the ordinance. Unless I know the nature of the ordinance, I can't really tell you. But frankly, even today, going after willful defaulters is something that is already laid out. So I don't really think...
It's been difficult.
No, it's been
wouldn't
difficult.
have been in this situation.
See, the fact of the matter again is you have to really prove that this thing is a case of willful default, that money has been taken away. And for that, you have to go into the courts. Now, to go into the courts takes time. And because, you know, the courts obviously have to hear both parties and then come to a conclusion. And that obviously takes time. But I would say, you know, the problem is less on that side than on finding systemic answers to what has really happened. I think it is really not appreciated the kind of impact certain decisions and certain issues have had in India. When you are talking about setting up a power plant and it is done on the basis of captive coal being available and suddenly the coal mine is no longer there, how do you ensure that the commercial viability of that entire thing is still there?
Yeah.
So, you have to understand that there have been happenings in India that has led to where we are. And it is not always dependent on a person's ability to execute or otherwise. Also, it is a fact that, during the boom period, everybody was setting up power plants. So people who were not into power at all felt that this is something they could do. At that point of time, it seemed to be a good thing to do. But when the challenges came up, these people were very poorly placed to take up these challenges because they were from a sector that had nothing to do with power.
Right.
So these are things, these are what is called, irrational exuberance of the times, which also have led to this. Added to this, there is a question of management bandwidth. Maybe in certain places, management bandwidth was not sufficient. So you have to take
scrutiny of loans dispensed, that's been a problem?
I do not think, it is a question of scrutiny of loans because, again, if you look at it, the entire system has lent to them. And it is not true that only the public sector has lent to them. There are very many private sector operators who have lent to them. And the fact is, maybe there were 1 or 2 private sector players who were not into corporate lending at all. Barring them, the rest are also into this as well. So I do not think it is a question of scrutiny. It is a question of understanding that there was a systemic issue. And the quicker we understand that, the better we will be in a position to take on the resolution of these.